Okay, now that we have our fonts imported and we've uploaded our project to GitHub, which by the way you didn't need to do, but it's good to know how, we're ready to get going on working on the footer and on that text that's on the left-hand side. Now I'm going to go through this a lot quicker because we've covered a lot of the properties inside of our navigation. But I'm still going to use the Sketchpad to lay it all out to try to make it a little bit quicker for us. All right, now I do have to point out that if you're going from video to video to video and you're creating this and you've uploaded your stuff to GitHub, one thing that you're probably going to need to do, and we've already had this, is that inside the Soap Factory, if you remember, we had to move our folders and files inside of this new one. So that means you have to open up, close down your editor, your project in there, and reopen your editor and come to that directory over there. And you can just open it up in any file explorer or finder and just drag it over into WinSCP and it will open it up for you. Okay, now I'm going to open up our style sheet and I'm going to open up our index. And I'm going to put this style sheet and the index side by side so we can see it a little bit better, since those are the only two that we're going to be working with. Okay, now I'm going to scroll down here at the bottom of our CSS. Also remember that all you have to do is right click and hit open with live server, and it's open right there, and here's our navigation. Now let's get started with the footer, and the first thing I'm going to do is look at our XD file, and you'll notice that the footer is down here and we have our home text on the side of the page. Here's our footer, and if we look at the height that's here, it has a background color. You can click on it, F8. We have two basically text areas in there. We're going to call them paragraph tags. So one thing that's pretty nice about looking at this is that it's very similar to the navigation, right? Both sides. Also on our home, if you look at that, we'll notice that the height is 106 and the width is 347. Actually, you have to reverse this because it's been rotated negative 90 degrees. So now the height now becomes the width, and the height or the width now becomes the height. Okay, so you got to remember that just a little bit when we move forward designing this. And then of course it's the color, and then you have the font of Roboto 80 bold. All right, so let's get going over to our Sketchpad and start laying this out. Now I'm going to start with the footer, and we're going to draw this out. And you remember the footer has two boxes inside of it for our text. Okay, and I'm just going to do this over here for text. And you'll remember that it's 165 pixels tall and it's 1920 wide. Okay, so we can actually start laying this out in the footer. The footer is going to actually be the element that we're styling. So right now in our footer we have a height of 165. We have a width of 1920. Now, if you remember when we talked about it in the navigation, we didn't put a width on it of 1920 because that was the full width of our screen and we didn't need to worry about it. But I'm going to talk about it when we write this because we're going to use a max width. Okay, which means that if your screen is bigger than 1920, the maximum width of that footer is only going to be 1920. But if it goes smaller than that, it will shrink to the size that we need. So max width will work here. The next thing we talked about is having two paragraph tags in there and a background color. So let's work with the background color first. So the background color is going to be the hex of the F8, F8, F8. Okay, we also know that the footer has two paragraph tags in it and they're separated to both sides. So we're going to have to do display. And I know that's not supposed to be a T, it's an L, sorry. Display flex. Okay, the next thing is we're going to align items, and I'm just going to put align items here. AI, align items, and we're going to do that centered. And if you remember correctly in our nav, that vertically aligns them up and down. The next thing is we're going to justify content, and we're going to do that space between. And what that does is it shoves these two text places right here and here to the outside right edges. Now, if you remember in our navigation, there's a little area in between both of these. And once you apply justified and space between, it's going to shove each one of these paragraphs to the edges, and we need to get that padding back. And the way you do that is we can add padding to the footer. And remember, this is a shorthand for padding, so it's going top, right, bottom, left, so there should be 4 values. We don't want anything on the top, but the right we do, which is 60 pixels. And then the bottom we don't, and in the left we do. So since they're identical, we can literally just say 0 and then 60. And whenever you just put 2, our browser knows that we're just going to duplicate this 0, 60, and just duplicate it again. So that should lay out the whole dynamics of our navigation. The only problem is that now we have paragraph tags in here with text. And those are going to be centered. We just need to change the font family and the font size inside of that, which we already have. Okay, so we're just going to put paragraph here. And you got to remember that it was the font size is 30 pixels. I'm just going to put font size. Okay, and then we have Roboto. And it is lighter. All right, so those are the properties for our paragraph in our footer. So now we have everything we need and we've drawn it out. Okay, now let's talk about this text that ends up coming over on this side. I'm drawing this sideways, so it's off just a little bit. So we're going to do this a different way. You put this in a div that's actually going to go the full height of the page. And this is actually going to be an H1. So this is a div. We're going to call it overlay text. So I'm actually going to write the property here, overlay text. All right, and if you remember correctly, I said the width of that now becomes 106 pixels. The height is actually going to be 100%. Now, if you go to the XD file, you're going to notice that this lays on top of all the content. And the way we get that to work, and it never actually moves if you scroll, is we actually have to position that fixed. And what that does is it fixes it to the browser's top left-hand corner. Now, you won't see any change when you do that until we start setting the properties of top, bottom, right, and left. And the only one we really need is top, and we're just going to move that to 0, which is the top left corner. The next thing that we're going to experiment with is how to get that home in there. But I just want to get this laid out right now and get that overlay text on there so we can see what it looks like. So you have everything here in your Sketchpad that we need to start developing. And our HTML is just going to be a footer and 2 paragraph tags. Let's go get started in that. Okay, so we're over here, and right after nav, we're going to put footer. And remember, I'm just typing the word footer. Now, one thing cool about this is we have 2 paragraph tags. Okay, so I'm going to put the caret, and then we're going to put P for paragraph tags, and then we're going to put asterisk times 2. So what this is doing is it's saying footer element, and then we're going inside the footer and putting paragraph tags times 2 and hit tab, and it scaffolds that out. Now we're going to go back to our XD file and get that text and copy that. I'm going to have to double click inside of there to copy this. I'm going to paste it inside this first one. Notice one thing that you want to do is get rid of that copyright symbol and put the actual HTML code that's needed for that, which is exactly what I typed there. Save that, go back to your XD file and copy this one. And paste that in there as well. Okay, so everything should be in our HTML exactly the way we need it, which is just the footer and 2 paragraph tags. Let's jump over to the XD file. We have everything we need. Okay, we're going to style that now. Okay, and if you want to see what it looks like, you can come over here and you'll notice that our footer is down here with 2 paragraph tags. We're going to fix that. So over in our CSS, we are going to target the footer. And remember, on the inside, we said that the height of that was going to be what? 165 pixels. The height or the width was going to actually be a max width. Remember, max width of 1920. And again, what that means is the biggest it's ever going to get is 1920, but it will shrink. We're going to add a background color, and that's going to be hex F8, F8, F8. After the background color, we're going to start laying out the items that's on the inside of it. And that's where we use display flex. Then we're going to align the items, center. We're also going to justify the content, and we're going to do space between, remember, and that shoves them both. If we go look at this right now, look, it's already right there. It shoves them both to the edges. And let's get those away from the edges by putting padding, and then 0.60 pixels. Okay, and if you look at that, now it's shoved in, it's aligned right here on each edge. So it looks exactly the way we want to, except for the font. Now we've already done the font before in our nav, but we're still going to target it here. We're going to put footer, paragraph, and then I'm just going to go up here to our anchor tags that we styled earlier, grab these same 3 lines, and move them to our footer. And now it comes out exactly the same as our XD file. But you're going to see some redundancies in here, and I'll talk about this in a further video. But how can we fix that? We don't want to keep writing 30 pixels lighter, 30 pixels lighter, or even some of this other stuff. But you'll notice we have it twice here. And we'll talk about adding classes and more classes later on. But first I want to finish, and I want to get the text overlay on there. So the last thing we're going to have to add is a div dot, and we're just going to write out overlay. And remember, the way I'm doing this, that dot means we're going to make a div with a class called overlay, and that's supposed to be text. Then inside of that, we're going to put an H1, right? So it should be just like that. So again, we're creating a div. The dot means it's going to add a class called overlay text, and then the caret means we're adding an H1 on the inside, and then hit tab. And then we can just type the word home. So now we're going to write the overlay text, and we're going to say overlay dash text. All right, so now if you remember from your sketch, we said the width was 106 pixels. The height is going to be 100%. All right, we're going to just give this a background color because I just want you to see how that's actually working. Okay, and we're just going to give it something like brown or something, just so you can see it. The next thing is I told you we're going to position this fixed. Let's take a look at it right now. So notice that it's below our nav. We're going to position it fixed and up to the top of the page. Now I always like to put my positioning up here at the top. One thing you need to know about positioning fixed is when you do that, it removes the normal block width and height, so it shrinks it down to whatever the content would be. So once you put position fixed on there, you need to make sure that you have a width and a height on your element. Now it will expand to the size of the content, so if you don't want to worry about any bigger height or width, then you don't need to put anything. But position fixed will take off the width of 100% by default. So another thing, so we have that, and I'm going to actually put top 0, and that moves our div to the top of the page. And you'll notice now that it's 100%, and it's over on the left-hand side, and it's located at the top left corner. Now that we have that, and we know where it's at, let's move this home around. Now I'm going to target the H1 by saying overlay text H1. And some of the properties that we're going to add in there, we've already added before. One is basically this font size and the font family. Okay, except the font size was 80 here. Okay. We also need that pink color, if you remember. And if you don't know, I'm going through this kind of fast, but the XD file has a lot of this, right? So we're going to say, okay, so it's that is actually 80, it's bold, it's rubato, right? And then you got some of this other measurements here. Okay, we're going to move back over. And you'll notice that there's a little bit of opacity on this. Okay, so we could probably change that if we had to. but we're going to leave it alone for right now. Okay, so we have that. Let's take a look at it in our browser. Okay, notice it's changed and it's bigger. Let's rotate that text. If you went back to the XD file, you'll notice that it's rotated -90. So we're going to rotate that. And the way you rotate that is you put transform, rotate -90 degrees. And you'll notice that now in our browser, it's rotated the exact way, but it's off the page. And the reason why is because it's spinning it from the center. Okay, no worries, we're going to fix that. And the way we fix that is by doing the same display flex in our div than the overlay text. Now remember, display flex works on the children, and that's why we're putting it in the overlay text. So we can control the children's, which is the H1 here. So we're going to put display flex. We're going to put align item center. Let's see where that's at. Okay. Notice that it's centered now and it's off the page a little bit. We're going to fix that by putting justify content center. And it moved it right into that div. Pretty easy. The only last thing we need to do is add some spacing in there, and we do that by doing it in the H1 itself, and it's actually called letter spacing. And we're going to put 20 pixels onto that. So there it's looking pretty darn close to what we have. Let's remove the background color of brown. And you'll notice that now it's overlaying on top of this. It's working great. If you actually wanted this to be a little bit of transparent, you could put, instead of the color of this, you could put the RGB value and then make it RGBA and put a little alpha on that. And the way that you would do that in your XD file, you click on this, you get this fill color, and there's actually an RGB value. Okay, and you could copy that if you wanted to, and then change the opacity. Okay, there's also an opacity, and you could change that as well. Let's take it down to 50% and see what happens. You'll notice that now it's kind of a little bit opaque. You can see the content underneath it. If you like that look, move it up. Okay, so now you can start seeing some content underneath there. So we've covered how to lay the navigation out in the home text, which is really easy to do once you kind of know the properties that need changed. So I hope this helped. And next we're going to move to adding the hero image and the paragraphs inside the page.